Hello, everyone. Welcome to the No Zoo Lions podcast. This is episode 8, and Chad and I are back. We took a little holiday over the Christmas break, but now we're getting back into it. And today's topic, it's kind of a two-parter, but the topics that we're going to be kind of revolving around today are what are the traditional reasons that cops hate DT? And
Mhm.
after that, it's going to kind of bleed into our answering of that and basically talking about designing training-based scenarios on Leo outcome.
Yeah, I love it. It's great to catch up, and it's just, yeah, I love it. I'm happy to be back, and I'm really glad that we're going to have an opportunity to talk about this topic because I think it's one that all of us have seen, especially if you've been a cop for very long at all. It's different when you're in the academy and you're excited and everything's new than once you get out to the street and you start doing the job, and over time, those attitudes sometimes change about training.
Now, when we were talking about traditional defensive tactic stuff and why cops hate it, we're not talking about why they don't want to train. This is different, right?
Yep.
So most agencies mandate that the officers have to train. So we were kind of looking at reasons that what are the traditional reasons that cops just don't want to do DT? So why don't you start it off on like throwing it out there and what you think like the most common reasons that cops aren't into it when it comes up?
So I think one is, and maybe we can kind of play off each other. I'll give one.
Sure.
One is injuries. There's this perception that I'm going to get hurt, that I'm going to miss time at work. There's a perception that DT or hands-on training, uh, especially with resistance, is dangerous.
Mhm.
Um, you've probably encountered this from a lot of officers as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Now, most of the cops I know, well, I wouldn't say most. Many of the cops I know, especially the older ones, do have injuries, and they're
Sure.
barely getting by being on patrol. They have bad backs, they have bad knees. They haven't told admin about it because they don't want to be benched. They don't want to burn sick time, and so they figure, well, I'm probably not going to get into any dust ups at work, so I'll be okay. And they go years like that. And the fact is, they actually get worse because they're not exercising, they're not stretching, they're not keeping the joints lubricated. So it's actually they're getting more decrepit sitting in the car. So injuries is a big one. And I think that they hear these horror stories about DT. It's like, oh, remember when Chad was training and that guy broke his ankle? That could be me. No way I'm going to sit out. So I think it gets blown out of proportion.
So do I. And injuries are a legitimate possibility when we
Yeah.
train. Injuries happen. However, with effective training, good coaching, with specific strategies, and that can be a whole nother podcast, we can limit the likelihood of injuries. Here's the other thing, too, that I think a good DT class will incorporate. As instructors, we should be asking folks, do you have something pre-existing? Do you have something that you're currently being treated for, or even something you're not being treated for, but it's an ailment? And let's work around those injuries. That's a constant conversation for me, especially in a law enforcement setting. If you're dinged up, but you're full duty, you're still going to have to perform on a call dinged up and full duty. So let's train while you're dinged up, accounting for that injury and trying to accommodate it with whatever it is we're trying to do.
Mhm.
So injuries can happen. Guys are broken, like you said. I also wonder sometimes, and once again, this is something just to throw out there for everyone in podcast land. I think some of the natural decline in an officer's health over the course of a career is also because we don't train
Yeah.
on a routine basis. We don't sweat on a routine basis. And so they're becoming more prone to injury if you are not doing what we're doing. My doctor said, with my background, and I have various injuries, um, almost all of them, in fact, pretty much almost all of them not Jiu Jitsu related, but many of them police or American football related. My doctors have told me if you stop training, you're going to have a host of mobility issues and a host of issues within 2 months. The best thing you can do is to continue to train. And I've had shoulder surgeries, I've got knee issues, I've got partially ruptured disc in my lower back. I have different ailments now. So injuries are a concern, but they're overblown, like you said. And I think the wrong approach is to not train in spite of them. We need to train anyway and try to nurse those back to health and try to get back to health. Every time I've had a major injury, I've told my doc, my goal is to be fully functional and able to fight another human. That's the goal. So whatever we're going to do, I want to get back to that goal. And that's how I approach those. Not that, well, I tore my shoulder and I never want to tear my shoulder again because we might have to fight tomorrow. So,
You know, it's funny about the injury thing. So, a few years ago, I had a bad knee and my meniscus was going, but it hadn't gone yet. And it
it's
went on
almost
the,
worse.
what was that?
It's almost worse because then it hurts
Yeah,
routinely. Yeah.
all the time. And so, but I'm like, I don't want surgery and I'll be fine. And I put a knee brace on, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But in the middle of an arrest that I happened, he had like 12 warrants. I roll up on him at a bus stop and the fight is on. In the middle of that fight, my knee blew and it was an audible pop. I heard it and my knee's out of commission. So I obviously can't go, okay, let's stop, and you have to fight through it. And I think that most of my colleagues would fight through stuff. However, I will say that knowing this, here's the pitch again, knowing how to control another person, to be calm, to understand jiu-jitsu, understand grappling, it made a massive difference in controlling him, getting on the radio, and it not going completely south on me. So I actually credit jiu-jitsu and knowing how to move and also being in pain and understanding pressure, because anyone who's done jujitsu knows that there are some situations that are horrendous. They feel crappy, but you're not going to die. And so you can work through it pretty easily. And so I was able to do that. So I credit that, actually having an injury, knowing what injuries are, helped me on the road.
Yeah. Another reason I think folks don't train that gets brought up a lot is that officers are lazy. And there is some truth. Some officers are lazy. Um, what has been your experience with that as a obstacle to police officers training?
So I don't know if is so Chad, is lazy the same as I won't be good doing DT, so that's why I don't want to do it? Are those two different topics?
I actually like where you're going. Take me down that road.
Oh, that's what I was
'Cause
thinking.
that was in my mind for next, but take me down that
Yeah.
road because they're connected. They're connected. So what do you mean by that?
Well, we talk about ego and we talk about laziness, but I think that a lot of cops, when they're doing DTs, are like, DT is coming up next week. I'm not very coordinated. I don't like the stuff. I know that I flounder, but I've got to kind of pretend with my other colleagues in the room. So that fear of not being good at something, I think holds back not just cops, but everyone doing something. We all are white belts somewhere. We all
Yes.
start. And this is honestly, when I start new things in my life at 51, I just put on that white belt mentality and go, I know I'm going to suck and I'm totally okay with it. And I enjoy the learning process. So I don't let the I won't be good get in my way and become a barrier. I accept it and I actually relish the challenges that are going to be presented towards me. All my colleagues who are cops, it's like you beat out 97% of the people who tried to be a cop. So you're already way above. So you should have that drive and that willingness to be look on those new challenges. So that's how I look at it.
So I've found what you just said to be so true in a couple different instances. So Robert Follis, who's one of my dear friends, when he was still with us, Rob used to say one of the hardest things is to get an adult to continue to do something they're not proficient at and for them to fail in front of other people, especially. And he says it's the opposite with a kid. Can you imagine a little child learning to walk? I've got several young grandchildren and they go to walk and they fall over. And then they go to walk and they fall over. Can you imagine if they just quit? Like I tried twice and now they're like 12 years old and they're crawling around the house. You say, what are you doing on the ground? And they say, oh, I tried to walk. It didn't work. I'm not good at walking. So I just quit. And or a child trying to learn how to speak. Um, your, I think it gets amplified, and I think there's a reason for this. So some of the lazy slash ego that we're interpreting, I think it is, there's also a phenomena that you're speaking of, and that is not only am I adult, but I've been told I'm in control. I've been told it's my job. I've been told I can't lose. Losing's not an option. And now I'm a 14-year cop who still can't do a takedown.
Mhm.
I should be able to do a takedown. I'm a 14-year cop. I can't win a simple physical fight in a trained manner. I could go crazy and just try to overpower them and hopefully win. They're going to get hurt. I'm going to get hurt. Everyone's going to get hurt. But I don't have a trained response to this resistance that a person is giving me. And I think it gets way worse because in the academy, they don't know either, but they'll try. The newbie cop, the white belt mentality you're speaking of, they're like, man, I got to learn this or they're going to fire me. Then they realize in year 3, we're not going to fire you. You're just going to be able to suck at it for the rest of your career.
Yeah.
And so there's that ability to encourage or promote, motivate them to say, you know what, I'm not good at this. This is something I'm going to use at work. I need to get better at it, and I'm willing to flounder a little bit in this room to get better.
Yeah.
Do you address any of that specifically when you're doing law enforcement training from an instructor level? Do you know that that's potentially a problem for the people in the room?
Yeah, all the time. I mention it because every person who has that thought in there, I make it relatable, being like, I had that thought too.
Just verbalize it, right? Get it
I
out.
Yeah, like I know where you're coming from. I am not special. I am an average guy who just worked his ass off, and that's my superpower. Just keep going. And God, it's so cliche now, the consistency thing, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And
that's
I
what I do.
I will take that lazy or that ego officer if I'm super critical of him and I'm just like, oh, cops just have ego. Oh, he's just da 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 da. And I don't take a second and actually understand, okay, did we just hire all these ego people? Because in the academy they were trying. Now they're no longer trying. And if I'll just take a step back and verbalize it and say, hey, if you don't know how to do this and you're not good at it, you're fine. When I started, I wasn't good at it either. It's okay. We're going to help you get there. Just give us good effort today. I talk about that all the time when I'm teaching cops in a mixed format where everyone doesn't train. I
Yeah.
talk about it all the time. I address it. I get it out. I just say it out loud. If you feel like you should know more than you know, it doesn't matter. Start today, work
Mhm.
on today, and we'll get you better. And then keep coming. So that's good too.
So,
Go ahead.
okay, this is part of that question. So, other than I won't be good, what about the cops that say it won't work? What I do, Chad, is I smash you in the face and it works. That's right. What you're going to teach me, it's not going to work, or I have a preconceived notion, or why am I wasting my time training with Chad when I know everything that I've done is working? Like it's just a waste of time.
I'm not actually putting content out for the people who know everything. Like if they watch it, they watch it. If they get something out of it, I would assume they probably don't.
Hmm.
And so I'm not I'm not actively I'm putting stuff out hoping that they'll notice, but if they don't, they don't. Like if you have that mentality where you think you know everything and no one can teach you anything, that can be an obstacle to getting anything out of something I show you. Now, if they're being forced to come because there's a scheduled DT training at the department and it's their day and they're going to show up, I'm still going to put on the best class I can. And in those formats where they say, well, I've done all these other things that have worked, what I do with that. So now they're there, they have to be there, they have that attitude you're speaking of. What I do in that format where they don't have a choice, they're going to participate anyway, is I say, don't throw away anything that's working and anything that's within policy, within case law. Do it. Hold
Mhm.
on to it.
Yeah.
Continue to do it. Today, I'm going to ask you to explore something you could add to that. And if the end of today you don't like it, go back to what you're already doing as long as it doesn't violate policy or case law. Do whatever you want to do. You don't have to do what I show you today.
Mhm.
But but try it. And I also say this also could be an opportunity for you to learn how this works. So if someone tries to do it to you, you could counter it.
Mm.
Even with all the knowledge you have and the path that you're going to take on your calls, if someone took this approach, maybe they train and they know how to get a body lock and they know how to do takedowns. Well, now you're going to learn how they work, what that person is doing, even though it's something you're never going to do. And you're going to learn by understanding it, we can learn how to counter it. So I also take that angle with those people. But at the end of the day, with the person who is a mandatory, so the person online who knows everything, Ari, I'll actually cut contact with them fairly rapidly and I won't engage them.
Yeah.
Like if someone online says, well, I already know that wouldn't work, that would never work. Like that's code for we don't want to have a conversation
Of
on
course.
it in an online contact. For one, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of time I don't have, unless I want to mess with them, and then I goof around with them and I play with them. But the person who online says, hey, I've got a concern there, aren't you exposing your back? Well, that person I'll engage with.
Mm.
So that's one aspect. In the open market, for lack of a better word, I'm consuming whatever I want to consume, and I'm here because I want to be. If you take that attitude, I'll just consider you know everything, and I'll work with people who actually want to have a productive conversation.
Yeah.
But in the room, in required LEO training, that now I have to get the room, I will take those extra steps and say, and not that it's wrong online. I've tried it online, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
If someone has a fake name, a fake profile, they're not putting up any video of themselves, and they've got 100 reasons why your thing wouldn't work. I found online it's not productive. But when that same person gets in the room with me, they are hesitant to make such crazy claims. And they're more likely to say, especially if I say, well, let's try it. And I suggest, and once again, that's all situational and where are we at in the day. I'm not going to put the whole rest of the class off so I can have some one-on-one with this guy or this gal.
Yeah.
But I've found that it's two different environments. And in an environment where we're in person, generally those declarations are less. So people will say, well, I don't really want to do that. I would rather do this.
Right.
To which I say, as long as you're within policy and case law, you're golden.
Mhm.
But today we're going to work on this. I'm still not going to do it. Cool. After you leave, you don't have to do it at all. But what if you understood it so someone tried to do it to you? Generally, I'll try to get buy-in on some level that the knowledge will not hurt you, even if you're not going to do this technique.
Yeah.
And I've found quite a bit of success with that. What do you do when someone comes at you in that area?
The term I use when I'm coaching is, at least internally, is I try to speak their language. I can usually suss out a person. I can see how hesitant they are. And I try to see what angle, like if I'm trying to come straight at them, I know it's not going to work. So I try to come around. I use analogy or I get them engaged. And I'm like, hey, John, what do you use on the street? Like I know that they're resistant to training. Like, what's worked for you? I mean, you're 20-year member. I haven't been on as long as you. Why don't you tell me? So that's how I kind of engage. And buy-in that way is always a good way because they want to tell a story and they want to tell what their experience.
100%.
So I think that works pretty good.
That
And
works.
and it's not just to get them going because they actually may have something that would be excellent for the room to hear. So I do like hearing those experiences.
I just thought of something also that you and I both do that I've seen you do. And it just came to me while you were talking. We also often will say, well, this is a way. There's more than one way. This
Mhm.
isn't the way. This is a way, and this is the way we're going to work on right now. But there could be more than one way to handle a guy who doesn't want to get in front of your car.
Of course.
And this is a way, and this is the way we're going to train because it's 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 my job to come up with a productive training session, but I am never going to tell everyone in that room that A, I know the right or wrong way to do everything, or that B, I even know what they're going to prefer to do. I'm just going to show them technically how and why something works when it wouldn't work. Maybe what can happen. Maybe a follow on, teach a series. That's always very, very productive. We're going to have a focus and we're going to teach these plan on things. Every time you and I teach, we have some idea or a very specific idea of what we're going to work on with the team at that time. That's not to say there's not another thing we could work on or another thing that would work. And so I stay away from battles of finality, for lack of a better word.
Right.
This is the way you're going to do this, unless the department that if the department outlines we are going to do this or we are not going to do this, well, then I make those lines drawn clear, especially if I'm leading training. The department, you are not going to do this. That would be the only time I would make absolutes. Otherwise, I try to kind of do what you're doing.
There's a fascinating thing that happens with cops who train. Initially, when they're in the academy, the DT instructor goes, "This is how you do it. Here is the way." And then time goes on and they become, their brains start working more. And they go, if this doesn't work, we're going to give you option A and B. So you now have two ways. And then as the years go by, it's no longer an option A, B, or C. It becomes a dynamic, flowing thing that you can have numerous options from that position. So, but that takes time. So when I get the, hey, Chad, what if question, I can answer that until the cows come home. But if their mind doesn't revolve or understand that, it's not going to be very helpful for them. It does actually take some time to understand human anatomy and movement and that type of thing. So,
One of the things that I'll often say too, and you've probably heard me say it, is if somebody really starts hammering home, well, that wouldn't work because this, that wouldn't work because this,
yeah.
then I'll bring up the counter principle, which is a principle that says everything has a counter. And one of the things we need to do when we're applying either technique or curriculum or making a choice on what we're going to do in a live event is, if I get countered, where am I going to end up? Where is he going to end up? What is the likely outcome of the counter? Is it devastating to me, or does it just mean I miss or we reset? Uh, those are things that are very, very important. So I'll often, if someone's being that counter guy in the room, I'll often say, man, it's really good that you're aware that this could fail. And I agree it could fail.
Mhm.
But even though it could fail, oftentimes I'll open it up to the room and I'll say, hey guys, what technique or what thing could I do that's going to work every single time? There's no way it's not going to work. And
Yeah, of
almost universally, the room will say, there's nothing.
course.
And I'll say, perfect. So even though we're dealing with counters, maybe we'll deal with those later in the class if we have time. Right now, we're going to focus on this, knowing that there's a potential counter.
So,
And I just all the way away from it.
so what we're trying to do as trainers, I think, is trying to give our students the highest percentage outcome under variables which can change. So that's all we're doing. And I think that's going to lead us into the second part of this question. But before we do it, before we talk about that, there's another one that just hit me. Another reason that cops hate DT is, and this is maybe controversial, but is personality clash with the DT instructor. The DT instructor is an a-hole, is a poor teacher, that type of thing. So that's a real thing. It's like, oh my
That's a
God,
real,
they're teaching. So we have to address that because it does happen.
or they're beating up the students.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to show how cool I am. I'm going to Donkey Kong everybody in the room. I do not believe DTs. I don't believe a general DT session is is necessarily the technique part, especially a testing session. That's a learning session. Now we can test through specific active dynamic drilling with resistance, and we can even ramp that up to open sparring. We can even create law enforcement scenarios to test the things we're training. But I think the instructor thing, I think you're dead on. He either talks down to people, he's rude, he's condescending, he's overly physical in teaching moments. The instructor thing is a real problem.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I'll tell you what, I've said this so many times. One of the reasons I'm effective at teaching cops is I've taught in the private sector. I've taught when the department didn't bless me. I had to compete to get a coaching spot and I got paid. And that is a competitive process. If you run classes where no one wants to come anymore, you're going to get fired. You have to teach in a way that people can relate to and people want to come and they gain value out of your instruction. If you injure people when you coach, you're going to get fired in the private sector on a routine basis, right? We've been running PJJ, C4C, PJJ classes since 2006. I have needed an ambulance to the training because someone got hurt one time since 2006. And now we're in 25. So it's 20 years. And that was for a person with a pre-existing injury that didn't tell us that pre-existing injury. And then a person from their department who knew about the pre-existing injury, which was a car crash with a neck injury, suplexed their friend joking on a break because they thought it would be funny onto their head. So they didn't even get hurt doing what we were doing in class. They got hurt on the side doing their own thing. Now, we had minor injuries for sure. Not going to say that we haven't, but like this is an emergency. I need this person transported. That's one time. So as an instructor, you can have a large bearing on the learning environment and on the safety environment of the room. Yeah. And that is a legitimate concern, is to have good instructors leading combative training, because there is a possibility we're going to hurt each other.
Yeah.
We have to do this properly.
Yeah.
I think another one before we move on.
Yeah.
That I don't think is controversial, but it doesn't get talked about enough. Normally, if we're in a room of guys who train and they're complaining about all their teammates who don't train, normally it's lazy, it's ego, it's out of shape, it's all those things. Rarely do we say a lot of departments and a lot of traditional DT manuals are nonsense. They're teaching nonsense. If you have DT run that is not in an RE manner, a PJJ manner, an Invictus manner, an officer survival skills manner, if you are running DT, CJ coaches, if someone's leading DT with an inferior lesson plan and stuff that quite frankly will not work, I don't want to go. And that's the state of many DT curriculums. I believe that's been Invictus is one of your main things that you have helped change, is to usher in this idea that we're not even addressing a large part of what we do at work. We hit bags, we hit them with a foam baton, we yell, get back, and nobody's actually putting their hands on each other and working for control and dominance. And so I think some of the lack of wanting to train DTs is that it is, for lack of a better word, it can be, I'll say, no, I will not say it is. It can be a waste of time.
And that's where I think the SWAT guys and the ERT guys actually excel, because if you look at a SWAT member from 30 years ago today, they're constantly picking from military stuff and they're changing their tactics. And I've seen it evolve, and it's getting better and better, and the real life scenarios and stuff like that. But the defensive tactics and the hands-on stuff, we have traditionally been like years behind where society is. For example, they were still teaching pressure point stuff, and MMA had hit the arena, and people started training, and they were MMA fighters, and they're trying to do this to people, and they were resistant to pain, but they kept hammering that home because they didn't realize they had to evolve, and they didn't understand what was happening. So we as defensive tactics instructors need to see what's happening around us and apply it and move along with that timeline.
There's no doubt, because otherwise we're not going to get that buy-in from our students, and they are going to have an attitude and they're not going to want to train. And I can't tell you how many times I've led training. I've had a veteran guy or gal who did not want to come. They're forced to come. They show up. we get done. We're doing our debrief at the end. We do our verbal debriefs just like PJJ and Invictus, and we do a written debrief.
Mm.
When they say things like, I didn't want to come, it's BS. The department made me come. It's total nonsense. Next year I'm going to call off, but today was good. I actually do think I wish I would have known that arm extraction we did. That's a great compliment from a senior guy. He got a lot out of the training. He's going to complain about having to come. He's going to whine. Possibly there's certain guys, but he's going to say, "Man, that was super cool." And then sometimes we get the senior guys who just flat out say, I wish I knew this 15 years ago."
Right.
Like that happens routinely. And that also tells you that that person's resistance to being in that room prior was what we were showing them.
Mm.
And now that we showed them something that's job relatable, that actually works, that we can teach and pass on to another person, you see them embrace it in many, many occasions. I've seen it happen over and over. I've had 17 to 18-year guys that when you first give them some good training, I've had those guys start training and earn blue belts and earn purple belts, and continue to train and go seek training outside the department because they actually see something that works and they go, okay, I was the ego guy. I was the I don't want to train guy. I was a I'm going to get hurt guy. And now I'm actually got a gym membership and I'm going and I'm rolling.
Yeah.
So I've seen that transformation.
So how do we jump from those, say, six things we talked about, the traditional reasons people hate, to designing training based on Leo outcomes? Like, where do we go from here, and what kind of training would be beneficial?
Your LEO outcomes are going to be some kind of grappling or control uh, that leads to control, that leads to restraint procedures. And as you seek to obtain that, you have to deal with the reality that this could occur with strikes involved. This could occur with weapons involved, both the bad guys and the good guys. This could occur with more than one opponent. You have to start to put the variables in that we see every day at work. This could occur on a very unforgiving surface. This could occur with a wide variety of suspects, some who are very athletic and young, some who might be older, some who might be obese, some who might be mentally ill, some who might be younger, whatever the case may be, some who might be a committed, have some training. So we have all these variables, but the law enforcement outcome, the overriding one, and I ask this in my classes in a level 1, I'll ask the room, what is the overriding law enforcement outcome in a use of force encounter? And I'll hear to go home. I'll say, yeah, that's a goal, but what's the overriding? What is the reason that I'm actually physically contesting with another person? And I'll get different answers. Generally, sometimes quicker, sometimes later. Someone will say custody, and I'll say exactly. That's it. So our law enforcement outcomes for our combatives has to lead us to that end. However, in getting there, we may have to defend a punch. We may have to defend a gun grab. We may have to do a team tactic. We may have to use a wall. We may have to execute a takedown. We may get taken down and have to do a reversal. So there's all these skill sets that fit within that law enforcement objective, law enforcement outcome. So I think as long as you're training, you can relate it back to a law enforcement outcome. Well, then that's the overriding goal. How do I get there? I think it's through skill development first. And once they have a skill development or a skill acquisition that they can actually execute some things, well, now we start to build out the tactical plan for different scenarios and different variables. What is your thought? And last thing on this, and then I'll turn it over to you. I think the main difference here is you have everything from the Master Ken parody, where his outcome is to gouge people's eyes and kick them in the groin and disable them, to the Jiu Jitsu outcome, which might be to seek a submission or win on points or win a contest, to an MMA, which I can combine striking and grappling, to a boxing outcomes. There's all these different sporting contexts or self-defense contexts that have outcomes. which may not be the law enforcement outcome, but the law enforcement outcome could encompass parts of all of those. So I think you have to be varied in your training while still focusing on, at the end of the day as a cop, what is my primary role when I have to lay hands on other humans?
Mm.
Do you use the same methodology to come up with outcomes?
I do, and it made me think of a couple scenarios and experiences that I've had over the years with some trainers. Um, so I find that if you are doing your defensive tactics, some trainers like to come in and go, "Hey, here's a scenario which is really rare, but we're going to introduce it to you." And I don't actually find that beneficial for members. I will find it beneficial for guys and gals who are going to jujitsu all the time and they're taking our classes and we know them and they've spent months and years on the mats. Then that's when we do advanced, like, hey, your ankle is broken. You can't use your right leg. But I have seen that put into play for zero experience. And the problem with that is, one, they're never going to revisit it again in their career. Two, they don't even have the basics. So if they don't have
Yeah.
the basics, it doesn't matter. It's like your leg doesn't work. What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to just Donkey Kong them and just use my rage and stuff. That doesn't help. So um, it's putting the cart before the horse, I think. And I have seen that. And I watch instructors do that because they're trying to do what's the cool thing that I've seen on YouTube with a situation that just happened with cops, and they want to introduce that. Again, beneficial, but if you only touch on it once in 20 years, it's worthless.
Yeah. That's another reason too. So it absolutely is worthless. Also, as we look at our training, and this is a Nosy Lions podcast, and we say things very directly. So I'm just gonna say something out loud. I'm gonna talk a little bit about it so everyone understands out there in podcast land what my perspective is. But I'll give you an example. If I call it Gracie survival tactics, then I got to work to a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu outcome. That's not necessarily a law enforcement outcome. Now I'm not talking. I'm just saying in general. If I call it Krav Maga, I'm working to a Krav Maga outcome, which the outcomes of Krav Maga were developed in Israel in the battlefield. Now, does that mean that I couldn't use anything from GST? No, I could. But just the fact you named it GST means it has to have outcomes that are unique to you, or that people have to come to you for the answers.
Mhm.
If you're going to adopt Krav, you're still going to Krav for the answers in an arena or an environment where that might not even be applicable. And so that's one of the reasons that we've selected police jujitsu as a name for me, Officer Survival Series by Rob McGow. CJ up in New York teaching 10-1 Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. All these guys are trying to put in there, we're working towards law enforcement outcomes, and those come first. My preferred method of jujitsu, gi no gi, whether I like to do Greco wrestling or I like judo or I like all those things are secondary to let's work out law enforcement outcomes and then take from those things that will support those outcomes. And so that's one of my thoughts where sometimes people will fall short, in my opinion. This is Chad's opinion. It's my podcast, so I get to give my opinion. And I think one of the reasons that I started to develop a system was that I felt like many of them were not law enforcement outcome based.
Yeah.
And for two reasons, either it could be a marketing reason, and I'll admit right now on this that I don't know the reason, and it doesn't matter to me. But it could be a marketing reason. It could be you don't know what you don't know because you're just not a cop, and you're doing the best you can. You're trying to help cops, but guess what? Like, you teach some stuff that as a black belt who loves jujitsu, who has competed, who does jujitsu outcome coaching for athletes who compete in that arena. I would never do that as a cop. And how do I know that? Because I'm a freaking cop and I'm working for law enforcement outcomes that are based on actual experience in the training room and in real life downrange. And those two things add to us developing a law enforcement outcome curriculum.
I'm not looking, well, I'm not looking for techniques, I'm looking for concepts, as you and I both always talk about. But brand new people, they gobble onto the technique first because that's how most brains work. But when you can introduce understanding concepts, you watch them, they're able to create and do things in the middle of a move. And I think that's really important. So, actually, Chad, how do you teach a concept to a brand new jiu-jitsu person or cup? Can they get it right away or does it take months? What's your experience with that?
Number one, can they get it or learn knowledge? Yes, I believe they can. I believe you can teach them what inside position means and you can define it and you can show them. Can they then make that actionable in the fight? That's on them through repetition and through ongoing consistent training. But I believe they can learn the idea. What's the definition of structure? That's the value of teaching in a principle and concept based manner is that as you coach and as you teach and they learn these principles, concepts, and then even as you teach them techniques, you refer back to the principles and concepts, they are actually learning knowledge. To actually make that knowledge physically actionable in a fight requires them to take the conceptual principle-based idea and then drill it with increasing resistance until they become competent and capable of doing it under pressure and under time constraints and on time. They develop timing, they develop all those things. If we just stay, so this is a very interesting debate in the jiu-jitsu world right now, the ecological method where we don't teach any technique and we just have them roll and we just have them figure it out, and the technique based, and these two camps fighting with each other. I believe it's both. And there was just a debate on this online in the jiu-jitsu world. It's different than law enforcement coaching, but the argument was this is the only way to learn. And if you don't learn this way, you're not going to learn. My guys are better than your guys. And then I believe, and that guy who believes that, the ecological, he said there's no other way to do it. Like you can't combine it. I think it's craziness. I've been combining it for 20 years. Now you can make an argument, he could as a coach, that that's less efficient or I like my way better. My answer would be keep doing your way. I'm getting great results. Do your way. Keep getting good results. Good on you. But I believe it is a mix, to your question specifically. Principles and concepts teach knowledge, how and why something works, when it doesn't work. How do we define an angle? How do I know principally when I have an angle conceptually? Well, it's when my hips are turned to the person, their hips are turned away. That's a simple conceptual way to realize I've achieved an angle. How do we achieve an angle and maintain it with technique? That's something they're going to have to continue to work to make that actionable. But that's why I believe if all I do is teach them the technique to get the angle, that technique is going to take time to get proficient at. And I believe because they're not proficient at the technique, they forget steps and they never become proficient. But if I teach them the principle or concept I want them to understand about the technique, then I have them drill the technique and we refer back to it. I think they can learn the principles and concepts fairly rapidly to the point where they could pass a written test.
Right.
To pass a physical test means you have to now practice consistently over time to execute that principle through whatever technique it is. That's also why I think you could do multiple techniques and still be right. That's why we always say, and you do it. So when you're developing an LEO curriculum, or I believe any effective curriculum, self-defense, jiu-jitsu, MMA, we need to have outcomes clearly in mind for whatever it is we're training for. That doesn't mean that skill development needs to be tied directly to that outcome. We could develop general skills that then we can relate back to the outcome. But for the curriculum, we need to stay outcome based on what we're trying to do. And that's what the variables of the kind of fight that we know we're going to be in. Next, we need to have a principle and concept based structure for every single thing we teach towards that outcome. And that's how you make a really effective law enforcement curriculum.
Yeah.
You also need to be ready as you explore conceptually and principle based in this ecological manner where we do have free flow rolling and we learn by doing. I believe that's a thing. That's how we evolve the curriculum. So your curriculum is going to evolve over time. But what's going to be interesting is if you have good principles, those are not going to evolve. They're going to stay fairly consistent. The principles I teach have worked in a fight since we've been fighting each other.
Yes.
I didn't create any of the principles. However, I do believe that understanding the principles, how I state them can be unique to me. How I present conceptual things could be unique to me. But I believe that combination within your layering of your curriculum, let's stay outcome based. And then let's stay understand the principles, concepts, how and why stuff works when it does. And then let's have techniques that allow us to physically do those things. I believe that's the secret to a really good law enforcement curriculum. And you can even break the outcomes down to individual circumstances within the fight. I'll often ask guys, what's our overriding law enforcement outcome? Custody and control of the bad guy. What's my overriding outcome if I'm on bottom in a fight in the street? It's to get up. Yep. So now what principles, concepts help us get back to our feet, and what techniques do we use to make those actionable?
Yeah, I love it.
Your whole curriculum should be that way. Yeah. He tucks his arms under his body. What's my outcome right now? It's to get his arms out. How do I do that? I make his elbows come out from his chest. I displace his head, which produces an opening for me to get to his wrist. These are things that I believe you can even take the outcome, principle, concept, technique, a method of curriculum development and take it to every little thing, like takedowns, takedown defense, everything.
Yeah.
With your overriding principles and outcomes of custody and control. Let's be mobile. Let's be able to transition. Let's create angles and let's control distance. These principle-based things allow you, as long as they're throughout your curriculum, the student will begin to recognize it and it gets reaffirmed. So it's super solid way to make out curriculum.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. We can't cover every outcome that a Leo is going to find themselves in, but if they know that they should get inside position and whatever they need, then it applies to almost everything, which is great. You need free thinkers out there, right?
Yeah. What calls do you control distance on? All of them.
All of them. Yeah.
What if he has empty hands? What does control distance mean? What if he has an edge weapon? Now he's got a baseball bat. Now he's got a handgun. Now he's got a rifle.
Yeah.
Distance matters in all those scenarios.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't mean I'm always going to make it, but distance matters. So controlling distance, controlling range is an ongoing thing. What if we're not engaged physically yet and he's simply erratic walking around? Does distance play a role in whether or not we're going to have to fight? Yeah, it does. So
I recently found myself, so I'm back in patrol, Chad, after 3 years in domestic violence unit. So I'm doing the nights and taking the calls again, and I'm having a super fun time. And I want to tell you this story. And I think you already know this, but it's also for the listeners. But so on my particular patrol watch, I have 9 of my students that are on that patrol watch that range from white belts to 4 straight purple. It is one of the coolest things ever, I have to say. I absolutely love it because most of the calls I go to, I know that people are trained, so the Leo outcomes will be pretty good. So I'm pretty happy that that's happening. When I started 11 years ago, that was not the case, and we have more people training than ever. So it just takes time, but it just was a warm, fuzzy moment for me. So I'm pretty happy.
It's an amazing moment. It's what we're working for. It's changing the culture. It's changing the capability. Is a single one of those 9 less because they train? No, they're all better. Every single one of them is better. Yeah. It's added to them. And they weren't broken before. They weren't bad at their job before. Nope. Every single one of them is enhanced though. Why would I not enhance my physical capabilities when I could be killed, someone else could be killed, a partner of mine could be killed? Why would I not try to improve myself over time? And this is a very simple way that you could do routinely, a very simple part of your week that you could actually improve your ability to do your overall job.
Yeah,
And you're safer, your partners are safer, the community's safer, and finally that bad guy is safer. And so I the safer I become, the safer everyone else becomes. The more capable I become, the more ability I have to de-escalate and control situations so that we don't have crazy outcomes. We're able to dramatically affect our own safety first. And once we make ourselves safer, we make everyone else safer.
totally.
Yeah.
So before we get to the line share, I'm just going to go back and just identify. We identified 6 things that traditional reasons that cops hate DT. And they were because they have injuries or afraid to get injured. They had an ego thing. They won't be good, or they're afraid they're not going to be good at what they're going to be taught. Laziness is a factor. They have the attitude that this won't work, or what I already do works and I don't need something additional. There's a personality clash. Maybe it's a bad instructor or personality clash with the teacher itself, or the teacher is teaching nonsense and then the students recognize that and then they're like, why am I wasting my time? So those
Sure.
were, and there's probably more, but those are the ones we talked about today.
Yep. Yep. Those are common ones. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
So,
then having an effective curriculum was outcome based,
yeah,
principles and concepts, and then techniques. And you could have overarching over your whole program, and then each area of your program could actually be broken down in that manner as well.
totally. Okay, let's do the line share. Quick question that came in from Brad, who is an MP. So Brad is a follower of Invictus and C4C, a longtime follower. He is always commenting. So I'm going to throw this out. This just came in, so I'm reading it for the first time. He said that even though law enforcement departments are different within every jurisdiction, use of force guidelines are mostly standardized. But why is there not a national standard for police combatives? Is what he's asking. That's a
So
great question.
that is a great question. And one of the issues I have with that, I, I think the only standard should be, I think we should agree that you have to train grappling skills, striking skills, grappling. Okay, I'm going to start over. I believe that the standard should not be one person's curriculum. Because for one thing, it might end up not being mine, could end up being somebody else's. And that could be up to whoever's in charge at the time nationally. Let's say the president decided what cops train, what system. I think it's a horrible idea. Even
Yeah,
if they pick me, I would say don't do that.
yeah,
Like all these other guys can teach too, and they're all awesome.
yeah.
And you could learn a lot by going to a class that's not put on by PJJ. So we are not the arbitrator of all things. So I think a national curriculum, but I don't think that's what happens necessarily with use of force. Each department has a use of force model or their own way of applying the overarching case law. So how could we make DTs similar? I believe for law enforcement DTs, you need to have a grappling component. That grappling component needs to include on the feet, offensively and defensively, on a wall, offensively and defensively, and on the ground, officer and controller offensively, trying to work to the law enforcement outcome, officer on top or officer on bottom. When I say offensively or defensively, I mean a cop working for law enforcement outcomes of control to custody and a bad guy working to either defeat the cop's attempts to control them or take them down, or he's actively trying to take the cop down.
Yep.
So that's our grappling. That should be a component of police training nationwide. And that's been a big hole. That's why you guys push so hard for grappling based solutions, because that is not a strength. And I've been a cop since 98. The second thing is the program has to have some striking in it. Basic law enforcement strike application and basic law enforcement defense of strikes, and those strikes that are likely to come and that we see in the street. So a striking application. The training should have team applications. There and solo though, solo and team. There are some agencies where a guy's in a very remote outpost. In Canada, some of the RMCP guys are off almost by themselves. So you're not always going to have a back within 2 minutes like you do in the city. Whereas in the city, you are going to have partners. So both a solo and team component to everything we're teaching. Everything we're teaching must have a weapons-based component to it. Both bad guys' weapons, our weapons, and maybe even improvised weapons. Everything we do should account for the fact you could have more than one bad guy. That's got to be built into the training. So all of these, I think you develop several categories like that, and you say that a law enforcement system must have these characteristics. And I also think you say it must be heavy on grappling and control
Yep.
because that is our overall outcome, and that is what we do most in these struggles. So it's got to be based on that, but all those other things have to be in it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you go with that. You don't pick a system. Even PJJ, I would if they literally came to me tomorrow and said we want to pass a law, everyone has to train PJJ, I would say cool, and then pass a law. They also got to train something else.
Yeah.
But I'm cool with you saying they have to train, but it shouldn't be me. It shouldn't be you. It shouldn't be
Yeah.
whoever is in charge gets to pick a guy or a system. We've seen states favor a guy or a system. We've seen that turn out to be crazy nonsense,
Yes.
and then regret that choice and back off of that choice.
Yeah.
So I think it's just we need to see. Also, the other thing is we need to see a commitment to training for law enforcement. The national standard should be cops train every single week at work, a minimum of 4 hours a week of combatives. And that could be split into 2 hours in their work week, or that could be for an hour a day. But the other thing that I believe should be mandated is these are subcategories of training that a law enforcement approved system should have. So when you're evaluating PJJ, do they teach all these things? If not, hey, go teach civilians Jiu Jitsu or go teach Muay Thai or whatever it is, or judo. So you've got to have a complete system that just teaches these different things with an emphasis on grappling skills and clinch skills. And then the other thing is departments are mandated, cops are mandated to get 4 hours of training a week at work.
Yeah.
That's what I would do nationally.
Yeah. That's the standard. That's the national standard. They should be training. It's not obviously what they train is important, but I couldn't agree more. And maybe we'll move that direction. Who knows?
We're moving that direction.
Yeah.
There's departments that are starting to do this.
Yeah.
Under wellness, a lot of departments are starting to do this. Whole nother podcast, though.
Yeah. Well, Chad, really appreciate it. That was a fun one. And if you have any questions for us, just send us a message, of course, and check us out at the nozoolions.com website. And we'll be here again, bringing you awesome topics. And so remember, be safe out there and don't follow us, lead with us. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.